worship big time. Just take the Spider-Man movie. Not only did it get great reviews, it was the most profitable movie of the year, approaching the billion-dollar mark. Our story begins with Stan Lee, the man who 40 years ago invented Spider-Man for Marvel Comics and created the modern superhero. How was Spider-Man born?
I've told this story so often, and it may even be true. But I was watching a fly crawling on a wall, and I was looking for a new superhero. And I figured, wow, wouldn't it be cool if a guy could crawl on a wall?
Did you realize at the time that this was a totally new thing?
No, not at all. I was just trying to make up some new characters so that I would keep my job, keep eating and paying the rent, and I hoped the books would sell. We didn't think we were doing anything revolutionary.
But Spider-Man was revolutionary. Stan Lee had broken the mold. He created something unheard of, an action hero with psychological problems, a slightly neurotic and fragile superhero.
He can be shot, he can be gassed, he can be hit very hard and knocked out. He's stronger than the average person, but he's incredibly vulnerable.
And Spider-Man's alter ego, Peter Parker, was just a dorky teenager, bullied by boys, rejected by girls, and indifferent about his superpowers. Yet, he struck a nerve. At first, the spectacular success of Stan Lee's Spider-Man seems bewildering. Who in his right mind would be interested in a nerdy loser who has no success with girls and is even ambivalent about his own superpowers? Answer: all those ambivalent, nerdy losers in America who had no success with girls.
As a matter of fact, my publisher hated it and didn't want me to publish it when I told him about it. He didn't like the idea of it being called Spider-Man. He said, Stan, people hate spiders. You can't give a book that name. When I told him I wanted him to be a teenager, he said, but teenagers can only be sidekicks. Then, when I said I want him to have a lot of problems, he said, don't you know what a hero is? And he wouldn't let me publish it.
But of course, Stan eventually prevailed.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's really so cool.
Which is why, 40 years later, Avi Arad is sitting on top of the world, arguably the hottest movie producer in Hollywood. Avi's biggest blockbuster, Spider-Man, which set a box office record, earning $120 million its first weekend. Are comic books the hottest thing in Hollywood?
I think so. I mean, it's very simple. They make money. That's what makes them hot.
It's hard to imagine another Hollywood producer juggling more projects than Avi. Here he is on the set of The Daredevil, another Marvel property being turned into a film. Daredevil's about a blind lawyer, played by Ben Affleck, who becomes a superhero. Avi's producing Daredevil.
There's sort of two casts of Atlanteans.
And here's Avi listening to screenwriter David Self pitch the script he's writing for Namor, the Submariner, yet another Marvel superhero. This, too, will be a movie produced by Avi.
Don't you people ever die?
Avi also produced the X-Men. He's producing the Incredible Hulk.
And action.
And, of course, sequels upon sequels of, pardon the pun, Spider-Man spin-offs. Okay, take a guess. How many Spider-Man movies are there going to be?
Looking at my birth certificate, I think I'll be involved with at least 3. At least.
In other words, you think the franchise is going to run...
Oh, way past all of us.
But before Hollywood worked its computer-generated magic on Spider-Man, it was a plain old pencil that brought the superhero to life. Among the artists who wield that pencil today is Joe Quesada.
This is the part of it that's still, thank God, it's still done by hand. If not, I'd be out a portion of my paycheck.
Quesada wears 2 hats at Marvel Comics. He's an artist, and he's Marvel's editor-in-chief. Quesada comes to work like lots of other New Yorkers. He enters an office building, rides an elevator, but as soon as he walks through the doors of Marvel, He's inside an extraordinary comic book universe, a playground where they manufacture superheroes. It's a fabulous fantasy factory. And these are the artists, young men and women, who toil to tickle the imagination of millions of readers, young and old.
What we do here is the equivalent of the cavemen sitting around the fire talking about the great hunt, or talking about the great god of hunting. It's no different. We're just storytellers, and we tell stories of the heroic ideal. It's that simple.
What kind of mind writes comic books? Any kind of a mind.
No.
I couldn't do it. I think you could if you're a writer. In fact, that may not be true, because I remember years ago, Mario Puzo, who did The Godfather, worked at our company. And he said to me, before he wrote The Godfather, he said to me one day, Stan, I'd like to write a comic book. I need some dough. So I gave him an assignment. I didn't hear from him for a while. 2 weeks later, he came back. He said, forget it. This is too difficult. I think I could write a novel instead. And he went out and wrote The Godfather.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
And I didn't even get any credit for that book.
Today, Stan Lee is regarded as the comic book industry's grand old man. He invited us to accompany him to the Golden Apple comic book store in Los Angeles to survey his work. Almost the entire Stan Lee collection. Stan's the man who changed comics forever by bringing a modern sensibility to the superhero.
I like to think that what we do is realistic fantasy. We have to suspend disbelief in the sense that our character is going to have some superpowers. Is super strong, can crawl on walls, can fly in the air, whatever that is. But in order not to make it just a fairy tale, you have to believe in the person, and you have to believe that such a person might exist.
And how do you view the superhero comic?
You know, I personally just am not that interested in it.
If Stan Lee revolutionized comics in the 60s, Art Spiegelman took the genre to a new level a few decades later when he created Mouse, the first comic book ever to win the Pulitzer Prize for Literature. Mouse told a Holocaust story, specifically the story of Spiegelman's father, a Polish Jew trapped by the Nazis. This was grown-up stuff, and it changed comics almost as much as Spiderman did.
Is the comic book world at a tipping point now? Yeah, something's really afoot. I couldn't have even said that as clearly 6 months ago or a year ago, where Mouse, for instance, was seen as an anomaly. Now Mouse is seen as part of a larger picture.
It's a picture that includes serious comics, sometimes called graphic novels, that just like Mouse, are winning readers and winning awards. Take, for instance, Chris Ware's Jimmy Corrigan, the smartest kid on Earth. It's a blend of words and images that tells a story with depth and complexity, and it's not just for kids. Ware is a Chicago artist and writer whose work recently won a British Literary Award.
I still can't quite believe it, and it didn't actually dawn on me until I had left England that it had actually happened. I kept thinking, this is a joke.
But it wasn't a joke. The graphic novel is carving out a niche for itself.
What's Papa's job? He goes on missions for Mr. Reed.
Some are even being turned into movies, like the recent hit, Road to Perdition. Suddenly, the stigma that's always been attached to comic books is lifted.
Now, it doesn't seem like you really have to be ashamed of yourself if you have a comic book in your possession. Before, I'd hide my copies of comics inside a copy of Playboy so nobody knew I was reading one.
There was no shame in San Diego last August when thousands of people showed up for the annual comics convention. These are America's die-hard comic book fans, but their numbers are dwindling. Circulation is only a fraction of what it was a decade ago, and a far cry from the way it was in the 50s, when it seemed every kid had his face in a comic. The irony is that while sales of mainstream comic books are down, Hollywood is feasting on the books, turning the old comics into a billion-dollar industry.
All the films you've got going now, take a guess. What are they going to be worth? What are they going to bring in?
Well, if you look at the studio that looks at revenues, ticket sales, DVD, these movies They are all in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
So if each movie is in the hundreds of millions, you right now are looking at more than $1 billion, huh?
$1 billion is not, it wouldn't be unusual.
But Stan Lee says none of that money is finding its way towards him. The creator of Spider-Man, who's always been and still is a salaried employee of Marvel, claims he hasn't made a penny off the Spider-Man movie.
When I wrote these stories, I wrote them as a writer for hire, so I don't own the characters.
This doesn't put you in a state of rage?
No, I'm the kind of guy, I'm just interested in what I'm doing at the moment, and I don't dwell on it. I try not to.
Right, because it's painful.
A little bit.
Now, a guy like Stan Lee, who came up with so many of the storylines and characters, is he getting a fair shake?
Sure. Everybody's getting a fair shake. It's years of work by many, many, many people. There's not one individual that is responsible for all of it. Stan created great characters, and obviously, ask him. I think he's getting a fair shake.
Do you feel that you're being screwed?
I don't want to say that. I mean, after all, I'm still a part of the company. I love the people. I love the company. And as I say, I try not to think of it.
Stan says thinking about it only makes him unhappy. So what does he think about? Mostly about his next project. Nearly 80 years old, Stan Lee is still writing. And when he does think about the past, he thinks about some of his favorite lines, like this one, spoken by Peter Parker's Uncle Ben.
With great power comes great responsibility.
That's a line that I just tossed off, you know, and somehow people have remembered it and they've quoted it, and I'm delighted about that. With great power comes great responsibility. Wow.
Spider-Man lives by it.
Yeah, I guess
Very
so.
few other people with real great power do. Maybe that's the secret.
Maybe. But I'm sure glad I wrote it.
Who are you?
Who am I? I'm Spider-Man.